Okay, so we're back. And I'm responding to a question from my last video. So if you haven't seen number 2, go back to number 2. But Stuart from Hawaii asked me, where do we get our programming? Where do we, is it from our childhood? Is it from our parents, from society, from propaganda? Where do we get our programming? And so, sit down, relax, pause the video for a second, go get a cup of coffee. Let's unpack that, because that's a really, really big question. And not one that could be, if we really want to examine that, we got to go very deep. And so, here we go. First of all, yes, is the answer to that question. The answer to, all of the above there. Does it come from this? Does it come from that? It comes from all of those things. However, we need to examine really what programming is. Programming, essentially, in my opinion, is influence or informing. So what is informing our decisions? What is influencing our decisions? What's involved in all of that process? And so we need to literally go back to the earliest formation of the cells of what you are. The sperm and the egg came together, and that divided and divided and divided, and each one of those cells is evolving. And as it's evolving, it's being influenced. It's being influenced by the mother's emotions, by the mother's biochemistry, by the environment that the mother is in. Whether or not that is a wanted pregnancy, it's an excitement, or whether or not it's a, oh my gosh, oh, phooey. Whether or not the father was open to that pregnancy, whether or not he wasn't. All of these energetics are influencing the cell's growth. And we can see it in petri dishes. We have cells growing in a petri dish, and we affect them by cold, by warmth, by chemicals, by electromagnetism. And each one of those things has a different effect on those cells. So the cells are orienting to time and space. And depending on the level of, or what the orientation is, whether it's towards kind of a hostile, uncomfortable environment, or whether it's towards a super peaceful environment, it's orienting towards these different vibrations. And so it normalizes these vibrations as like, this is what's normal, and then begins to try and compensate for those. So those are just kind of the emotional, biochemical kind of states of the mother and the father and the environment that the fetus is being brought up in. And these have a profound effect on the formation of these cells and what is being normalized as what vibrations are, what it means to interact with life. Then we have all of the chemical influences. Someone my age, I'm 60 and turning 60 this year. And someone my age in utero was being exposed to anywhere between 50 and 100 man-made, unnatural, synthetic chemicals in my blood before I even came out of my mom. Okay, 50 to 100. My children who are in their 30s were being born with as many as 200 known, mostly carcinogenic chemicals in their bloodstream, in the cord blood of the baby, before they're even born. And now, according to Moms Across America, it's well over 300 known chemicals in our babies before they're even born. And these chemicals are influencing them greatly. These chemicals mostly are carcinogenics, and the cells are having to fight against these carcinogenic chemicals. And they're coming in from the food, from the water, from the air, just from our environments, from the off-gassing of plastics in our home. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. However, these are in fact influencing the child, influencing the cell structure, influencing and informing and programming that being to interact with its reality in such a way that it is in a defensive stance. Before we even come out of utero, our bodies are already being attacked by petrochemicals. And that attack is putting us in a defensive state, in a state of alert, in a state of having to compensate for these chemical equations, and then however they're combining in our bodies, and then whether or not they're neurotoxins and interfering with our neurology. And then, oh, goodness. And then we have all of the various immunizations that are taking place and how those are influencing the body. We have then whether or not the baby's on formula and whether those formulas have various petrochemicals in them because they're not organic. Whether or not they're GMO and synthetic life forms in that regard. So it goes on and on and on. Each one of these things informing us and creating our programming, if you will, as to what life is all about, and kind of this defensive stance, kind of this irritable stance, kind of we're fighting to survive kind of thing. And that's what our organism is going through. Whether we're cognizant of it or not, that's what our organism as a body is actually going through. And this state of kind of readiness, alertness, war, this state of irritation, aggravation in our bodies is what becomes normal. That this is, that vibration is normal. And that in later years, when we try to cleanse ourselves and we try to rid ourselves of some of these influences, it feels unnatural. The state that we end up in is completely unfamiliar because we've never known a real sovereign kind of experience. We've never really known a chemical-free life. We've never really known an immune system that can relax. And so it's disorienting in many ways. So that's kind of like non-cognizant programming and influence of our body and how we stand. Now, this video is probably going to be ending up, I'm going to have to probably cut it up into 2 or 3 videos because here I've gone almost 8 minutes and just talking about just in utero. Just came out. And looking at the programming that's involved in that. Now, what's also influencing the cells is the diet of the mother and the family. And I don't mean just what they're eating, consuming, like food diet. Diet meaning the consumption of energy. What types of music they're listening to. What type of television shows or movies. What type of interactions they're having socially with family members and or cousins or aunts or girlfriends or boyfriends, or whether people are going through divorce or being happy, or we're in the middle of a war, or there's, the struggle for survival and paying bills, and all of these things, all of those energetics that are in our reality, even when we're in utero, are informing us about the external world, are informing our neurology about the reality that we're going to have to face. And it's very rare, if ever, that a child gets to be brought up in an environment that doesn't have those influences. And the reason I bring all that up is because it's very important for us to understand the normalization. We take that as normal. And I'm here to say it's not normal. It's what we've grown accustomed to. It's how we are currently operating. However, by no means is it normal. Every last bit of it is completely and totally man-made. It's not our natural state. I'll go just briefly into I was in a coma myself. When I came out of coma, I had amnesia. And the beauty, if there was, I always joke, I say, if there was a pill that I could give people that would give them amnesia, I'd be the biggest amnesia dealer on the planet. It was one of the most magnificent things because, much of what nags us about life, about our past and what have you, are these past memories that we have about events and things that have occurred, wrongs that have happened to us, things that people did, our irritations in life. And all that was gone. The whole past, just gone. Not there. No history of pains. No history of suffering. No history of any of that. Just gone. And you see, your mind, the prefrontal lobe here that we're going to talk about in a little bit, it uses this list back here, kind of this typewriter list that it keeps of all the events that have occurred, in your life, and reads that list, and then it looks out into the future. It's looking for anything that resembles things that are on that list in order to protect you, right? In order to protect you from reoccurrence of pain, reoccurrence of trauma, reoccurrence of problems. It's a life simulator, and it takes this information and it looks into the future, looking for anything that resembles what may have happened in the past that you don't want to have reoccur, and then informs you to try and avoid those things. Right? Steering mechanism, kind of pain avoidance mechanism. Anyways, that mechanism has nothing to project out into the future because it's gone. Amnesia is gone. And so there is no past that you're hoping to try and push down and not feel, and there's no future boogeymen coming to get you because you have no comparative data, so you're just in the present moment. And you're just free. Completely free. Zero anything. And then my mind started turning on a few weeks later. Turning on with gusto. And then all of a sudden the you need to, you ought to, you should, you have to, why aren't you, everybody else is, what, on and on and on. All the comparisons, all the rules, all the you. And every last bit of that programming was put in there. Was put into this mind. I did not come with that programming. And much of it, I say like all of it, was not being helpful, was not being loving, was not being compassionate, was not really providing direction for me that would bring peace, love, and harmony in my life. I was never enough from those rules. Always in comparison. And it's a big jumble of baloney. So I fortunately was able to see that after years of all this discovery. But the next part of our programming begins with our self-concept in developmental stages. And that self-concept really begins the idea of an identity, a me, a self-awareness in children across the globe, regardless of acculturation. If they're a Homo sapien, this is what happens. And for the first approximate 18 months, so the first year and a half of our lives, we have no separation consciousness, no me, no I identity, no I. And the part of the brain that's responsible for this I is known as the hippocampus. And the hippocampus lays dormant for the first 16 to 20 months. So somewhere right around that year and a half mark, it turns on. And when the hippocampus turns on, then all of a sudden the I shows up. Before then, like you might be playing with yourself in the mirror and you see the hand moving at the same time, but you don't know it's you. It's just this really cool event happening, but you don't know it's you. And then all of a sudden the I shows up. And the I has all these things it knows about itself. Now, I love broccoli. I don't like kitty cats. I'm fussy when I take a bath. I don't like going to bed. I mean, on and on and on. All these things that just miraculously overnight, this I shows up and all these self-descriptors show up. And everything that I says about itself is what it heard for the first year and a half. For the first year and a half, what it heard in its environment from significant role models talking about it. So everything that when my I showed up, everything that my mom said about me, everything my dad said about me, my brothers, my sisters, my neighbors, my aunts, my uncles, all the significant role models in my life, how they described who I was, is now what I become. And I just accept it as fact. Don't question it at all. The work I do with the empowerment class and stuff that I teach is getting people back to their pre-identity. That's to before the hippocampus turns on, so that you can be who it is you are here to be, as opposed to being doomed to who it is you were told you were. Because all of us, in answer to your question, Stuart, where does our programming come from? Besides all the biochemical feedback loops that are happening and our stance against those, we now have all these descriptors that we just accept as I Joe, I this, I that. And every last one of them all started from how people described us, whether they were accurate or not. So if my mom didn't like cats, she would project onto me always, she doesn't like cats. Cats are scary. And I might love cats, but I would never know, because my entire life now I've said I don't like cats because this person didn't like them. And we pass on these crazy, lores like that. They say, it's really interesting. In just a second, I got a phone call coming in. I have to decline it. Okay, hopefully video didn't stop. They say when women pass on knowledge from generation to generation, they called it old wives' tales, right? And when men do it, they call it science. Right? I always thought that was funny. Anyway, just a moment. So then, we have those influences where the propaganda begins. Okay. Now, there seems to be in all mammals, and pretty much almost all animals, a period through which a kind of herd mentality exists. A pack mentality where we have a sense of belonging. Animals need to be in a sense of belonging to the family, belonging to the group, until eventually we break out of that and we become individualized and move out on our own. But there's an inherent need for this sense of belonging being intact inside our beings. And unfortunately, the way our lives are, the stresses that we are under, lack of understanding of our human development, I could give a million different reasons why. We tend to love our offspring, our children, conditionally, where we intend to influence their decisions by conditional love, that either you do this and you're lovable, and you don't do that, and you do this and you're lovable, and you don't do that, you're not lovable, right? And it's interesting because in Aboriginal cultures and things of these natures, and it used to be for most of most of us, that there was that when we would break out of the pack and our sense of aloneness in this world, our sense of aloneness, that where we break out of the pack sense of belonging and then we enter into the kind of the global sense of belonging. Used to be beautiful rituals where the men would go off for the vision quest, and the women, their menstrual cycle would begin, and all the women of the village would, wow, you're now a woman. You're part of the cycle of life. You can recreate life. And these were, and when those things are happening, there is a sense of belonging that is being shifted to a bigger sense of belonging to the whole of life, right? And it generally would happen in our teenage years, which back in the earlier days, that was, almost midlife, that we're making this transition. Living 40 or 50 years, you were an old person in general, depending on what culture you were being raised in. However, we are being forced into that sense of aloneness, that sense of belonging being broken at much earlier ages, before we have the cognitive ability to manage it, before we have the cognitive ability to reason around it, where we are being shamed and made wrong for who it is we are, which leaves us in this sense of isolation. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling. We all can identify moments when our sense of belonging was broken. And it's happened many times, not just once. But in so doing, we have an automatic protection system that kicks in, and it's governed by something called the prefrontal lobe. And it works in conjunction with something called the reticular activating system. Now, the reticular activating system, its job is to confirm your beliefs, okay, to find evidence in your reality to confirm your belief system. And the prefrontal lobe's job is to be a life simulator, to simulate the occurrences of what are happening in order to protect you from harm. All right. Now, when our sense of belonging was broken, we did not have the wherewithal to think, that's wrong. What you're saying is wrong. It's incorrect. I mean, we just wholeheartedly accept these assessments of ourselves without any question whatsoever, because it's just the way it is. However, what we do at that moment when that happens is that we judge ourselves. And we say, I must have been bad because they're telling me I was bad and I was doing something wrong. And so then we develop a strategy. And all this is happening automatically. You didn't think, oh, wow, I'm bad. I'm going to do this now so I no longer have to feel pain. It's an automatic protection system that kicks in at a premature state that then begins to influence how we behave and act in the world. So that we're no longer just being ourselves, exploring and expanding. We are now living a directive made by an automatic protective system that if we act a certain way, then we'll be lovable and acceptable and don't have to feel that sense of belonging being broken again. And so, as a result, we find ourselves with dozens upon dozens of these directives that are controlling our lives. And most of that programming then comes from, once again, these significant role models that are influencing who it is we are and how it is we're going to be through conditional love and shaming. This is just the human condition. This is just in theory. I've been teaching this stuff for 40 years, and then people go through my class, and we unpack all of this, and we show all the sequence of events that occurs, and we map it all out so that then we can reconfigure all this kind of stuff. So when you ask, where does our programming come from? Initially, it's starting from that chemical interaction and this chemical sense of having to fight and struggle and have our immune systems compromised. And then we enter into a world where we are described and we accept these things about these descriptions about who it is we are based on the significant role models regardless of how enlightened they are or informed they are. And then we have all these sense of belongings being broken to where now we are trying to avoid being the point of ridicule and blame and shame. See, the problem is that if we are in those types of abusive kind of childhood things, which I've not met anyone after 40 years of teaching this stuff, I have not met anyone who's escaped it. So if you have, right on, good for you, you know. But I have not met, I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't, but I've not met anyone yet who's escaped it. So then we have all of those programmings going on. And then we have the furtherance of the chemical, equations that are affecting and informing our bodies. We've got the fluoride in our waters, which is numbing our brains. It's a neurotoxin. We've got now adults, like you and me, have over 1,500. Now they're saying that was 20 years ago. Now it's somewhere closer to 3,500 known chemicals in our systems, many of which are neurotoxins, plastics, all different types of. There's 80,000 chemicals that are quote unquote allowed into our lives. Over 80,000, of which only 300 have actually been tested. Okay, that's fact. That's not my idea. So we have these 80,000 chemicals coming into our bodies. Now, the other thing that's really interesting, and our bodies are having to compensate for it. So it's coming through the air, the water, the food we eat. And if you're eating meat, sorry to inform you, but there's like a huge, any type of animal, whether it's fish are the worst, actually, unfortunately, but then chicken and then pork and then cows. Think of all the pharmacies in the United States and then all the pharmacies in the world, and think of all the grocery stores that have their medicine aisle, and then think of all the hospitals, and think of all the pharmaceuticals that are in those distribution centers. Okay, it's a lot of pharmaceuticals. That only represents 25% of all the pharmaceuticals that are actually manufactured. The other 75% are used as what we call biosecurity in the animal industry. And so if you're eating those things, you are subject to experience those chemicals. They say even in the city water, if you're not filtering city water, with reverse osmosis or distilling of some sort, there's all different types of antidepressants and caffeine and all this kind of stuff that they just can't filter out in their systems. And it's in the water supply now. And so city waters, you're redistributing all of these psychotropic drugs that are being used for, maintaining the consensus reality normal. And then we then go to the attention span of children. And that the latest stat I understand is that 80% of focused attention, 80% of a child's focused attention while they are awake is with a screen. Whether it's watching a show, playing a game, doing some type of interaction with a screen. Mostly some type of programming, so television. And 80%. And the last 20% out of the is between the parents and then just playtime. But 80% of developmental reality is with children watching a screen and informing their lives through media outlets of some sort. Now, if we look at cartoons in specific, my understanding is that I forget if it was Parents Against Violence in Childhood Programming, some organization, they were doing statistical analysis. And on average, the half an hour children's television show had over, it was over 60 acts of violence of some sort towards another human being. Premeditated revenge or acts of some type of violence against that other being. Competitive nature, making them wrong, putting them down. On and on. This is what's informing. Okay? Does anything sound familiar with how maybe some of that programming has been extended into our adult lives in just the past couple years? This derogatory way of being, this negative sense towards each other. It's what has been normalized. Okay? You have to understand, all of this is kind of like precognition. This is not something we choose. This is what we've been brought up in. And then the consensus reality says, oh yeah, that's what everyone's doing, and that's what everyone thinks, and think it's funny. And we laugh about it, and we entertain ourselves with it, but we're normalizing these behaviors. And in that normalization, we get further and further and further from the truth of who it is and what it is we are and why it is we're here on the planet. So then we get into education and school and the Pavlovian programming of following rules, following time, following bells, following whistles, being that these behaviors are acceptable and that this is just how it is. Once again, all of this normalized. Now, this sense of belonging broken that we talked about earlier, and these strategies for avoiding pain that we have automatically running in our brains. And then this reticular activating system, looking for evidence of one's beliefs. That's not just isolated to our childhood. It then extrapolates out. And this is when you watch like The Social Dilemma or The Creepy Line, these two different documentaries. And they're talking about artificial intelligence influencing or reading what your interests are, nudging you towards confirmation bias, and then taking that confirmation bias away just long enough where you're almost going to stop interacting with social media, and then it gives you your dopamine hit again, and it gives you a dopamine hit, and it's literally massaging you into look at me, look at me, look at me, which then leaves you more exposed to more advertising and things of that nature. And all of that is based on your particular confirmation bias. And we've all heard that we are not interested in hearing things that we don't believe, or we'll poo-poo them right away. As best as I can tell, we have been influenced over time to take all that is natural as unnatural, and all that's unnatural as natural. Which has led us to take all that is important as unimportant, and all that's unimportant as important. And so our programming goes. It all breaks down ultimately to leaving our natural state, which is an ecocentric state where we are kind of one with our environments, we are one with our experience here, we are part of the environment, we're in tune with nature, we're in tune with the rhythms of life, in tune with the natural cycles that are occurring on the planet. And we are cognizant that our activities that we engage in, if they negatively impact our environment, they directly negatively impact us. That if I throw garbage and poison on my garden space, my food's not going to grow there. Or the food that grows there now is absorbing all of that, and then I'm taking it in and becoming that garbage that I just thought I threw out. And there's not even like a thought of that. It is just the natural sense of that's what is. And unfortunately, we seem to have lost that, and we now live in what is known as an anthropocentric reality, as opposed to an ecocentric. We are in an anthropocentric reality, which essentially means it's man over nature. That nature is here for man's use, and that we can conquer it and use it and develop it and take it for our gratification and our desires. And Jacques Fresco, a futurist who did the Venus Project, he has this saying that he says that we're not going to get it, that no real transformation will actually occur, in his opinion, until we understand that the Earth's resources are the common heritage for all life on the planet. Not just human life. That if I'm going to take something from the earth and it's going to affect and damage and destroy and eradicate another life form, then I need to find another way. Can we do that? The closest example to that I've lived with and interacted with was the Rainbow family. People who get together, anywhere between 10 and 30,000 people get together in a national forest every year. This year's the 50th anniversary. People coming together with this understanding, this kind of knowledge, living together to say, hey, yeah, I'm doing it too. Here's how I'm doing it. Having workshops and gatherings together. There's no money exchange. People living in harmony with the planet, coming together to share and celebrate that. And then pray for peace on the 4th of July every year. This year it's in Colorado. That's the most direct kind of human experience I've had with people who believe that and people who are striving for that. They're pushing against. They're letting go of. They are releasing. They are living into a reality that is functional, that is sustainable, that provides for the possibility of a future where everybody gets to experience the beauty of the planet, not just the people who can afford to fly there or drive there. Whatever theirs are left. So in answer to your question then, when we have these, where's a programming, is it the propaganda, is it this or is it that? When we have these unresolved childhood issues, where our sense of belonging is broken and we are now driven by an automatic protection system that is informing our decisions, that is out there predicting that the future is going to happen. And then this particular activating system is looking for confirmation about the beliefs that you need to fear this, fear that, so that it gets so ridiculous to the point that if you think someone doesn't like you, somebody at work doesn't like you, you go to work, and no matter what they do, the way they throw the garbage out, see, they don't like me. Or the way they flick their hair, the way they don't look at you, or don't, everything they do, you're going to find some type of confirmation in the see. And that's what we're doing. Not just with one individual, with thousands of things. With thousands of things. And so, in our current reality, I believe that this use of unresolved childhood issues, that the use of it through confirmation bias is having us all vent rage and frustrations and anger. And I guess I need to back up a little bit because, when these things happen to us more often than not, when we're being made wrong and what have you, when we're being in some form of abuse in that regard, you're truly a victim in that moment. And that victim needs a victim's advocate. And instead of going back to our perpetrator to deal with it, either on a virtual level through exercises or on a real level, we then have transference of that wrongdoing with our reticular activating system confirming that that's wrong, that's bad, this is this, and we begin projecting all of that anger and all that hate and all that frustration and all that victimization into our current reality as opposed to dealing with it in the past so that it's done. It doesn't mean that we let people do horrible things and what have you. It's like, no, that's unacceptable. You don't do that. But the anger and rage and frustration and distancing that is occurring right now in our adult realities is all based, period, all based. The emotional anger, the fervor, the I'm right, you're wrong kind of fervor is all a transference and projection of our unresolved childhood victimizations that took place in our early formation of our prefrontal lobe and our reticular activating system and our integration of how we're going to interact with reality and what was informing us. And so the current reality is just simply playing off of all that other stuff. But that other stuff is also being influenced by all different types of chemicals in our water, chemicals in our food, chemicals in our clothing, chemicals in our laundry, chemicals in our everything, all of this stuff. And then we haven't even talked about the over 5,000 different types of that's square wave signals that are hitting us from radio stations, TV stations, cell phone transmission, radars, on and on and on. And then the EMF that's coming off of all of our transformers and things in the house, and then the Wi-Fi in your home and your cell phone, and all of these things disrupting your ability to actually be able to have a sense of peace, have a sense of center, have a sense of self. And so the whole world becomes this survival dance that we're doing. And it doesn't feel good, doesn't feel great at all. And so we have to vent. We have to burn these chemicals. These are chemicals. These feelings that we have are chemicals. They're chemical states. I can inject you with any number of chemicals. Any number of substances make you feel happy, sad, enraged, jealous. Literally, I can just inject it. Your feeling state in that regard. And so is it any wonder that we've got to burn those off and metabolize them? And then when we can't, then we're just numbing out and what have you. I'm just on the tip of the iceberg of unpacking all this stuff. However, it kind of comes back to some research that Wally Minto, research fellow, he had an organization called the Alpha Institute and studying human behavior. And it was back in the 80s, I think, and they did a huge sample, 100,000 people, and they wrote a book called The Results Book. And it was a psychological inquiry into the state of human beings at the time. And one of the results that they found that I usually start this section when I talk about things, is, what's more important than love? Is there something more important than love? And what they discovered was that there was something that was more important to people than feeling of love in their lives. And what they discovered was that more important than a feeling of love was the feeling of being perceived as right. That was more important than a sense of love. That you weren't seen as wrong, because then you're bad. And that sense of belonging doesn't exist, and I'm isolated, I'm alone, I'm wrong, I'm bad. So more important than a sense of love being in the forefront of our reality was a sense of being right. And they went on to say that we would do what's wrong in order to appear right, then do what's right and appear wrong. So it will go along with the consensus reality, so as not to be isolated and no longer be in our sense of belonging. And so we look at our current reality and what's been forming it. And everyone about I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, on and on and on. This whole A against B, B against A. And if you step outside and you're C, then A and B are against you, kind of hold this, all this dance. All of it is this prefrontal lobe out there trying to predict the future, what it thinks is going to happen. Every last bit of it is trying to protect you from harm. Every last bit of it on automatic pilot. So we think that we're making decisions. We think that we're making informed understandings of what's happening on the planet, when everything we're getting is negative news. Everything we're getting is how horrible the world's falling apart and this and da-da-da. Well, just by the basic laws of physics, I mean, everything's in balance. As horrible as you can see it, I guarantee you the absolute opposite is happening right now. Are you looking for it? You see, because if you're allowing your reticular activating system and your prefrontal lobe to control the reality, you're not going to find it, because they're out there looking for all the negative stuff to protect you from it. So you have to step outside or repurpose those functions in your brain in order to no longer be dragged around by them. I liken it to an unmanned fire hose, where if you've ever seen an unmanned fire hose, it just goes wherever. Well, that's what's happening to our attention. That's what's happening to our focus in life, is being dragged around like an unmanned fire hose. Think this over here. Oh, here comes some more fear over there and more fear over there. On and on and on. All day, every day, being dragged around by this fire hose. It's time for us to grab a hold of that fire hose and direct it where we wish to focus. And where are all these things happening on the planet? However, I'm also existing outside of all of that. I see it happening. However, my sense of stability, my sense of self, my sense of connection to the planet, my sense of connection to the rhythms of life is stronger than ever. And that's not just luck. That's applying some tools and technologies. If you made it this far, I would imagine that you probably are interested in finding out more about those tools and technologies, you know. That's not why I made this video. I'm just here to, while I'm breathing, share what I understand. So, Stu, thanks for the question. That's a beginning investigation as to where our programming comes from. It starts off at very early age, and our neurosensors begin orienting to this reality. And then our confirmation bias begins with our early childhood programming, and then the influences of our significant role models, then the reticular activating system, and all these other, and 95% is all on automatic pilot. And so we can get out of this. We can, well, live in it, but not allow it to control us. To take back your sense of well-being. There's another question that a lady named Joyce wrote about, what's the point when living in such a negative reality? And I'll probably get to that with my next video. But this was almost an hour-long discussion on all this stuff right now. Like 48 to 49, 50 minutes. And we're just barely scratching the surface. So hopefully that was informative. Hopefully that gives you a sense of perspective that orients you to want to make some changes, want to re-grasp the reins of your attention and guide you towards reestablishing who it is you are on this planet and how it is you're going to be. Whew, God, I pray that does. So, I'm here. You're welcome to send me messages and check in and what have you. And I hope I've been of service to your life. So, namaste.